It is Sunday, March 9th, and it's getting pretty late with Jake Landau. Welcome to the show, folks. Today is the Liberal leadership race final results. People have already voted, but we'll be finding out the results later today. We're recording before, so we have no idea who wins, and that means we get to talk about things without, and you get to judge it based on the facts. But that'll just be one of our many topics today. This week's guest, we have a very accomplished woman. She's a commentator. She works in consulting. Her name is Sarbjit Kaur. She works at KPW Communications. And she has an extensive background in both media and political work. Sarbjit, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
No, it's great to have you. I've been a fan of you ever since I've been seeing you many, many times on the news. We're a Power and Politics family, so we're very familiar with you. Nice.
And I love your Twitter.
Thank you. I know my Twitter's a very hit or miss, and I'm also a fan of your Twitter. It really is where all of the commentary it seemed to be finding ourselves. I know we all promised we'd go to Blue Sky, but we're still there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Eventually. And I also like that you still call it Twitter instead of X. I'm not giving up that battle, and I hope you aren't either.
True.
Yeah. But I think to start things off, I guess tell us a bit more about your background and what got you involved in this line of work.
Sure. So KPW Communications, which I am the co-founder of, does a lot of communications consulting, a little bit of government relations, also known as lobbying. And myself and my partner, Carmen Wong, we both have backgrounds working in politics. We actually met at Queen's Park in the McGuinty government. She worked for a couple of cabinet ministers and eventually for the Premier McGuinty. And I also worked for the first South Asian cabinet minister, Harinder Thakkar, as his communications advisor and eventually director of communications. Did a little stint in the civil service. And then I left to go work in the private sector in public relations consulting. And Carmen went to be at CP24 as an anchor reporter for 10 years. And my background is also in journalism, print journalism, before I went to Queen's Park. And so our whole team is kind of a mix of people with good media backgrounds, but have also worked in politics. And I think it brings a unique perspective to everything we do. And of course, if you've worked in politics, you never really get completely out of the game. So whenever there's a municipal, provincial, federal election, we often find ourselves participating in some way or another.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that as well. But just that general concept of finding yourselves going back in for a campaign and then going back to your normal periphery job for the period in between campaigns. So, what really motivated you and Carmen to decide you were done on the government side of things and you wanted to move over to the private sector?
Well, I think like many people who work on the political side, you don't go into it anticipating that that's going to be a career. I tried out the civil service, which I really enjoyed, but eventually decided to go to the private sector. She wanted to go back to media. Governments change. 8 years, I think I was there 8 years between working in the civil service side and the political side. That's a long time. And we both wanted to take the skills and the things that we learned and still try other things. And I think it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I would recommend it to anyone, but not most people don't stay in it for a long time, on the political side especially.
Yes, true, especially on the political side. Although on the civil service side, people do tend to stick in it for a bit longer just because I know there are pensions that can vest, and it is a bit less politicized when you're on the civil service side of things.
For sure. A lot of people told me I was, crazy to give up a job in the civil service, but, I just still felt like I wanted to try and do different things, and I'm really happy because Carmen and I, we launched KPW Communications, and we really enjoyed that. We've done some other businesses together that are still in the process, and I think essentially at heart I'm an entrepreneur, and that's where we landed.
Interesting. And now that you're both at KPW Communications or KPW, What does your day to day look like in terms of doing communications work? What kind of clients do you serve?
Sure, we have a small team and we do everything from media training to media relations, which can include crisis communications. We have a whole digital team. As you know, everything nowadays is online, whether it's managing social media calendars or putting together digital plans or even digital advertising campaigns and communication strategies. We do public awareness campaigns. The clients are really very, very diverse, everything from startups in tech to colleges, universities, environmental organizations we've done work for. Again, a lot of even big corporations. Communications is so broad, and our team is kind of a full service type of shop. So you could show me any business or organization, and they would probably have a need for communication support in some way or another. We also specialize in multicultural communications and media relations, which I think is a niche that is a bit different from what other firms offer. And again, the knowledge of the political landscape, it really helps for any of our clients that touch on government in any way.
And is the main argument, I guess, for hiring an external communications firm is that you have experience on the journalistic side, you have experience on the government side, so it's more than just the fact that you're good at communications, it's that you have experience with how public narratives shape and how you can shape the narrative, or if you can't, at least ride the wave until it settles back down.
Yeah, there's an expertise that you typically would hire consultants for that, you get access to a team. So it's not one person. If you have different needs, you have access to a whole team that are all experts in their own specific part, whereas, going out to hire those 8 people in-house would probably be not feasible. It also is to fill gaps where you might have a special project or a specific need that comes up that is not a day-to-day need. And again, just really that outside advice, even sometimes to get a different perspective on things. And also smaller organizations that may not have in-house communication staff or capacity can lean on a firm that they can use as they need without, like you said, those long-term commitments of pensions and things like that. You have the flexibility. If we don't deliver results, nobody's on the hook to keep us around.
And that is a very political game mindset that comes to it, I guess, where you advertise yourselves. It's like you give us business if we do well, and if we aren't doing well for you anymore, then we don't get your business anymore. It feels very similar to in politics. It's like if we're doing well, then we get to keep our job after 4 years, and if we aren't doing well, then they're going to fire us and pick another person.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think having said that, I'm really proud of the fact that most of our clients are long-term clients that we've worked with for many, many years, and we've become like extensions of their team.
So they do like you.
I think so. I really think so.
They keep giving you money, which is a good sign.
I should hope so, yeah.
But no, I know you mentioned that KPW does a bit of government relations work, but I'm guessing it doesn't take up a majority of what's on your portfolio.
Not majority. Again, I would say we have a lot of media relations work that we do. The government relations, it's also very useful, though, because if an organization needs to do a lobby day, for example, or go to Ottawa and meet with different officials and make them aware of their cause, whether it's, environmental or more investment in tech or animal protection regulation. It could be anything. Those days and those types of endeavors are very, very useful. And even just groups who, don't understand how to reach out to a mayor's office or a minister responsible, I really enjoy being able to help facilitate that and making sure that their voice is heard.
So it provides a synergistic purpose, too, for main communications as well, I guess, in that regard.
Exactly, and just understanding that once you get before these folks, what are they going to be looking for? What are their decision-making kind of processes? Where do you need to emphasize and understand how your agenda is going to fit into their agenda, or how to best get some action on whatever it is you're advocating for?
Do you feel that lobbying and government relations are a bit of an misunderstood segment of political life?
Yeah, I think that's why even a lot of people use the word government relations instead of lobbying, because lobbying, you think of, and there is some aspect of this, especially in other countries like the United States, where lobbying is such a multi, billion-dollar endeavor. Whereas in Canada, we have some limitations on how much lobbying you can do and whatnot. But it's not all private corporations trying to get their way. There's a ton of grassroots groups, organizations, smaller businesses, advocacy organizations that need to get in front of government and need help with that.
So ultimately, it's a tool, and what you use the tool for matters more than the tool itself.
Exactly.
And that's interesting because I have worked ancillary to government relations in the past. I've done a few government relations meetings with the Ford government, ironically, and they knew I was a liberal or liberalish in the room. And it is funny, like how it's fine, but you kind of just got to joke about it a little, and then they're like, okay, well, how will liberals react if we do this? And then you're like, well, probably this or that. It's a very above board for the kind of reputation it has, but also I understand why the public will feel certain ways about it. And I do get what you mean on about how we'll say government relations versus lobbying, but I think also people forget lobbying is just one activity that government relations firms will do.
Yeah, and I would say that it's ironic that the types of things that really give people the bad idea of, what happens with lobbying, those types of deals or backroom types of shenanigans or corruption, it's never above board through the lobbying process. Usually, it's and that is wrong, and that's why, unfortunately, when those things happen, it really shakes public confidence in
Right.
processes. So I think there's legitimate reasons why people are suspicious and should be very, very, very attentive to how decisions are made in government, who has access, and how, to prevent anything happening that shouldn't happen above board.
Of course, and I know that I've written in the past about the Ontario Place deal with Therme, and how I mean, everyone in Ontario knows the story about Doug Ford's daughter's wedding, and there are certain aspersions that have been cast regarding the Greenbelt. There is an RCMP investigation that will be cleared up, or there will be conclusions drawn from it, perhaps. What conclusions remain to be seen. But it is interesting. You are right to point out that if someone is going to do like illegal activities, they're probably not going to do it through the lobbying registry that lists their full name.
Yeah, I mean, there's nobody registered on the lobby to go donate money to a wedding, right? And also, just when we were in politics, we talked about the smell test and the optics of things, that even if something is technically legal, how would it look and how is it going to be perceived by the public?
Which is a good basic test. Like, it's a good, basic common sense judgment for anyone working in the political sphere.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that a lot of people could go to the wedding and out of the goodness of their heart give thousands of dollars, but it's also, you should have a little bit of an idea of how that could be perceived.
I think at the most
go
extreme
above and beyond to prevent that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I think at the most extreme example would be something like in the United States where there's the inauguration fund and private companies are donating millions to, but not just for Trump, but apparently Biden and previous presidents have done it too, where private donations are received for a party. Like literally for the inauguration party to put on all the pomp and circumstance, and then you have to question, okay, who is the incoming president contracting out all of those things to? That very much does not pass the smell test that you speak of.
No, and the United States is also a kind of a whole different beast in terms of even the rules around how they can own stock. It's very different, similar but very different, and a different kettle of fish that I guess their population has to has to control if they feel that that's acceptable
I know
or not.
that Canadian members of parliament have very tight rules on how they can own private equities like stocks and bonds. Meanwhile, in the United States, I know there was the Nancy Pelosi index tracker, which was just tracking her trades, and they consistently outperformed the S&P.
Yeah, yeah, different ball game, and they have their own elections, and they have to do whatever they think they need to do to hold people accountable. But they also had that court case that had removed any limitations on election spending, which totally changed the face of big money coming in, just pouring into political parties. So I'd say in Canada, there's still a possibility for a regular person to run for election and get somewhere, whereas in the United States, it seems that there's a lot more money that you would need to be a contender.
True, and I do respect for all that we say that incumbents are completely unelectable, at least in Ontario. I know we had Bobby Ann Brady just won re-election for the second time as an independent, and Haldeman Norfolk with a very commanding majority.
Yeah, and there's spending limits at each level, and they're reasonable.
True. If anything, beyond reasonable, in some ways they are a bit stifling in how well you can actually pay the people working 100-hour weeks on a campaign. Because I don't think people do realize on election writ periods that the 2 or 3 people who work for a candidate in a riding, will find themselves working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., for 4 straight weeks. It is genuinely, the fastest I've ever aged in my life. I'm 25 and I have gray hairs now.
It's true. It's very intense, and the people who are actually working there day in and day out, they definitely it's a very tough job. But you get to learn a lot. I mean, I was younger when I was doing those kind of grueling campaigns, and you have a different kind of energy at that time. You get really into it. You're running on adrenaline.
It is indeed a grueling business, and one I am happy to no longer be doing as much. Folks, we will be taking a short break, and then we'll be coming back with our headline topics. Stay tuned. Today's episode of It's Getting Pretty Late with Jake Landau is brought to you by me. Yes, today we are asking you to please subscribe to our Substack at jakelandau.ca/subscribe. All of our content is available for free without a paywall. However, in order to fund the creation of this podcast, original journalism, and other Jake Landau endeavors, we do in fact need money, especially because I like eating food, and if I don't eat food, I'll die. So, any support you can provide is deeply appreciated. Thank you, and enjoy the show. And we are back from the break with our featured guest of the week, Sarbjit Kaur, and we are from KPW Communications, and we are talking about our 3 headline topics. Our first topic is the one that pretty much the entire country has been speaking about until today, the U.S.-Canada trade war, which might not just be a trade war, but might be a war for our basic freedom as a country. Now, there's been a bunch of up and downs with the tariff situation. Trump has put on the tariffs, then he said he's taken off the tariffs on auto, then he says he's taken it off on everything under the USMCA or CUSMA or NAFTA 2.0 or whatever we're calling it this week. And then the day after, he's like, forget 25%, we're putting a 250% tariff on dairy. Sarbjit, do you think that we can trade with a country that doesn't know what rules it's setting every single day?
I think we will continue to trade with them inevitably, just because they are, geographically and for other reasons, our largest trading partner. We are somewhat reliant on them. They are reliant on us. I think a lot of this is by design, and it makes sense. So when people were doing deals, they kind of said, hey, you make the parts, we'll do the manufacturing. You send the oil, we'll do the refining. And it was a balance of there's going to be jobs on your side, be jobs on our side. So it's giving business back and forth to each other. But the larger game here, I think, is just to try to force Canada back to the table to renegotiate a deal that is a deal. And whether this is just to try to revisit and they have a different economic strategy, or it's a distraction from the fact that they can't bring down the price of eggs as promised and do all the things that they campaigned on. I think that's the ultimate goal, is to create some chaos and some pressure to have countries agree to reopen the deals. But I think the way that they've done it is actually harming them, that countries are not that motivated to redo the deal. They might have to continue to do some trade for practical reasons, obviously, but they're going to be looking for permanent ways to avoid being so dependent on one trading partner.
And I know that one of the difficulties Canada has, and I remember that Pierre Elliott Trudeau talked about the third option, increasing our trade with European partners back during the Nixon days, when Nixon did tariffs in the 70s. But I do, obviously, just because of basic geography, there's a reason we trade so much more with the United States than with countries that we don't share a land border with. But I guess the question that comes as a result is, surely there must be more that we can do for trade integration within Canada, because we all know about the interprovincial trade barriers, but it is rather silly how a country built based on, we founded this country on the promise of building a national railroad and on the idea of strong east-west links to prevent us from being assimilated by the Americans, and now it seems we've walked into that rather willingly.
Well, I mean, I think I'm old enough to remember that when free trade was pitched by Brian Mulroney, it was the Liberals and the NDP who were against it. And they talked about the fact that this was going to take our jobs offshore. There'll be a race to the bottom in terms of manufacturing wherever wages were lowest. And, some countries have found that has come to pass, and the USA might be one of them. Although there is also a lot to be said that, the benefits of trade, that, you might lose jobs here, but you gain a lot there by being able to trade what you do have and what you're good at. So I don't know the final outcome of that math, but I would say that this is going to force every country to rethink what they can do on their own and how they can, at the very least, in case of some kind of dramatic, decrease in international trade, how can they be self-sufficient? And I think we had to think about these things in COVID as well. But often when we're not under pressure and we have other ways to get by and do things, we don't make those changes. So I'm actually a little bit excited, or I'd say the silver lining in this is we're talking about now doing some of those things to really amp up what our country can do in terms of high-speed rail and other things as well, and trade that can be diverse and with other countries.
And I do appreciate that this is providing motivation for true nation building and further tying our country together on large infrastructure projects and closer integration of regulations between different provinces. But it ultimately is very frustrating that we had to get to this point. Could we really not make trade easier without somebody saying they want to make us the 51st state against our will? Why did it take a gun being pointed to our head for provinces to realize, oh, maybe we should make it easier for businesses to do business in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the interprovincial trade barriers is it's not like a one thing. It's not like there's tariffs between Ontario and Quebec. There's a bunch of smaller things that are, differing tax rates and red tape. And so it might not have been as obvious that this is something that we need to tackle. It accumulates over time. But having said that, I say yes, in general, unfortunately, a lot of stuff doesn't happen until it has to happen, and it's like a pressure. And I think about whether it's in government or business or in our individual lives, you have a little leak in the roof and it's just a little drip, and then one day the whole roof comes crashing down and suddenly you make time to go get that sorted out. And so I do think that the pressure is putting it, and we shouldn't actually be in this position, and that's what I think makes me most upset about what has happened is, if the United States wants to shift to doing something differently, you don't do it in bad faith by ripping up an agreement overnight that's going to hurl hundreds of thousands of people into financial uncertainty and turmoil and not give people a chance to adapt,
Especially
including
because
in
the
their
deal
own
was already
country.
scheduled to be renegotiated in 2026. The whole point of having that set time was so that we could trade with stability without the worry that they were suddenly just going to rip up the deal without any notice.
Exactly, and it's hurting a lot of people in the United States as well. The stock market is falling, and the businesses are calling and saying, hey, we can't do this overnight. We can't adapt and change our entire supply chain. And so that's why he's flip flopping. But yeah, just the way to do it, and in such a combative way with a country that has never been anything but a friend and ally, I think is why you see so much animosity now, or anger towards the United States, or specifically the Trump government in Canada.
True. Anti-American sentiment is probably at the highest it's ever been within my lifetime in Canada, and not in the way that you normally think of, like criticism of America or resentment of America, like say during the Iraq War that you might have gotten in Canada. This is something much more visceral. It's very different.
Yeah, I think Canadians are upset because, if anything, we've done a lot of things that we might not have wanted to do on our own because we had to be an ally to the United States or kind of work in lockstep with them. You know, some of the things we've done to protect the North American car industry and not allow Chinese electric vehicles was for the United States, Canada car market or car manufacturing business. And now, why did we do that? We could have traded with China. We could have done other things.
And
We
it
could have
hurt
done a
our
lot of things differently.
and it hurt our environmental goals, because you would think, with all that we talk about climate change, if someone is like, we have an amazing electric car that's very, very cheap and affordable, and then Canada is like, we're going to make it cost double. Well, it is very frustrating, like, because as I understand, we have dueling and warring priorities in sovereignty and domestic industry and the environment. But at a certain point, it does feel like we've taken actions to contradict ourselves for the benefit of an imperial power that no longer sees us as worthy of their protection.
Yeah, it's like we picked a side, and we did our part to pick that side and make a deal with them, and then they don't want to honor it. And again, I think end of the day, a lot of good can come out of this. I don't actually think that these countries should be creating these little cliques, trade with anyone in the world that is offering a useful, beneficial relationship, and at the end of the day, do what you need to protect jobs in your own country. That makes a lot of sense as well.
Indeed. I still support free trade. I just think it should be with countries that we can trust to hold to the contract until the end of the contract. But going on to our next topic, today is the Liberal leadership race. The votes have closed, and we will find out in a few short hours the results of this race through the ranked ballot. But there have been some issues that many Liberal Party members had with voting. Individuals who were signed up and who were able to verify using the Canada Post Verify app or the in-person verification were unable to obtain a ballot from the party using their verification codes. This has been reported on by the news, but I've also seen it with a personal member of my family who was unable to vote up to the deadline and never got contacted up to Saturday night last night, despite the party's claims they would, and they weren't able to vote for leader. From the 400,000 party members who signed up to vote in this race, apparently less than half of them actually were able to cast a ballot, and more than 10,000 who had verified and completed the verification process and confirmed they were a real human person were unable to vote, and that is very frustrating. And that's a reason why I'm happy we're recording this before we know the results of this race, because Sarbjit, how do you feel about this, regardless of who wins? Like, I don't like the idea that we were so concerned about voter fraud that we now might have accidentally done voter suppression.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in that because there was so much concern about foreign interference and people were disqualified over it potentially, and the opposition was also howling that, Mark Carney, because he doesn't hold a seat, he could just be, manipulated into power. They needed to make sure it was a very solid process, that no one could say that, you had any kind of interference, foreign or otherwise. So I understand why they did this process. Having said that, they clearly need to work on it, and perhaps there should have been another way to still have, for the folks who don't want to do it online, can't do it online, or for whatever reason, so that they could still get their vote in.
And I know, the party has done in-person voting in the past in previous contests, and it's not that much of a hassle to set. I mean, obviously it's a production, but it's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah, or the next time around, even if they're going to keep the same digital online system, they have to learn from this episode and make it easier and get those bugs out. The only saving grace is it's equally difficult for anybody no matter which leader you're supporting. So it wouldn't necessarily create an advantage for anybody.
And it doesn't feel like an age issue because the Canada Post app worked. It's a bit arduous, but people were able to use it. It just seems to be technical glitches with the Liberal part of the equation, the part that takes that Canada Post verification code and then generates your ballot.
Yeah, I mean, again, in terms of technology, I just think any kind of technology needs to be super easy to use, super intuitive, and they can keep doing that. This was
and
the
it needs
first
to work
time.
Every time.
Yeah, and this was the first time that they've done this, so I can understand some hiccups, and I think they just need to keep improving on the process because personally, even myself, time is valuable. If it's going to take me more than 5-10 minutes, I'm really not going to bother.
Agreed, and I'm glad you bring that up because I've worked before. I've done political and communications and writing. I used to do software development and app development, and one of the most important things for me was just making sure it felt nice to use. When you tapped a button, it shouldn't feel like it delays or hangs. Like it should feel smooth. It should feel pleasant. It should feel frictionless, and it is fun because I know there are certainly qualified software developers within the Liberal Party who can handle this. If when you look at the New Liberals or the More Neighbours Toronto people, half of them feel like they work at Microsoft.
Yeah, and again, we have to remember they did this all very quickly. So again, I think we can forgive some hiccups, but it's got to be a learning for future.
True. I agree. It's I can understand it having those difficulties and that they're going to have to move on and hopefully improve with the next go in the future. I guess the question is, when will the next go in the future be? Because if this person becomes leader of the Liberal Party, whoever they may be, and then they win the general election, they will likely be the leader of the Liberal Party for a long time, and we may not have a new leadership contest for a while.
True, but I wonder if the same type of process will be introduced to other parties' leaderships because they have also been plagued with, accusations of foreign interference or all of these things. So when there's a technological evolution, I feel like it tends to go across the board, across the whole quote-unquote industry, and hopefully it can be improved upon.
Agreed. And ideally, I know there are a lot of Liberals who disagree with me on this, and a lot of people in every party, mind you. But I know I've talked in the past about Elections Canada running nomination contests directly. I know it would get rid of a lot of funny business, and it would also immediately solve the do you know if this person's a member of more than one party, because Elections Canada would just know. They would. So, and they'd also be able to do stuff like confirm citizenship or permanent residency. I agree. There is a learning process, and I hope that other parties will learn from it too, because I can't complain that they made it that they tried to make it secure. I know with the Canada Post app, I didn't just have to take a picture of my passport. I had to tap my phone to scan the chip inside the passport like they do at the airport. So, like, I can't complain on that front. They definitely made it secure.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And, that was something that you can't really fault them for that when people were trying to imply that, there's foreign interference in every party, because we know that there was foreign interference in the Conservative leadership race. Whether it affected the outcome or not, people can argue about, but the Liberals have stood true to, not just making accusations, but making sure that they are not subject to the same types of issues.
I respect that. Hopefully this will be a learning process in the future, as you've said, not just for the Liberals, but for other parties too. Now, moving on to our final topic of the day, and as you folks know, we like to focus on something more local or regional that might not have gone a bit under the radar for the rest of the country. And from British Columbia, we have heard in recent days that three Conservative members of the Legislative Assembly have left. One was forcibly removed after Dallas Brody, after denying the residential school genocide and mocking victims of that genocide, which obviously is completely beyond the pale, and fair credit to the Conservative Party of British Columbia for kicking them out. But not much credit to the two other MLAs from the party, Jordan Keeley and Tara Armstrong, who have now left willingly in support of Dallas Brody and are claiming that they intend to form a new partisan caucus within the Legislative Assembly in British Columbia. And in BC, I believe party status, the threshold is only 2 seats there, which is a lot lower than Ontario. But the end result of this is obviously, I don't think there's much debate over whether it's okay to deny the residential school genocide or to mock the victims of it. And I think that's obviously disgusting. But what's interesting here is that we might have a new political party in BC that comes into the legislature with party status.
Well, I was watching the BC election very closely, and I don't normally pay that much attention to other provinces' elections, but it was alarming to me specifically because you could see these types of characters were in the party that might become government. And sure enough, luckily they didn't quite make it. They came very close, but sure enough, those chickens that you have come home to roost, and that's what we're seeing. And I am a big proponent of what I call normal conservatives, that, hey, you can have a conservative party, but once you start getting very extreme types of fringe elements, I don't believe that it's a viable party that anyone should support anymore. And in the long run, it's going to hurt you because they might bring a certain segment of the population with them, but it's going to be at the expense of alienating a lot of other people for whom that is just not a view that they want to tolerate.
And it's it's interesting. There's certainly a crossover demographic. People who vote for Trudeau Liberals federally in the Greater Toronto area, but then might vote for Doug Ford provincially. And I think part of Doug Ford's appeal, as much of an oaf as he may be, is that his party is never really going around talking about abortion or gay marriage. So I do understand what you mean about normal conservatives. I may disagree with them on a lot of things, but it is refreshing as a queer man to know that they aren't questioning my right to exist in society.
Yeah, and I mean, the far right, it keeps getting more, you can't be far right enough. And that's what the conservatives in BC are seeing now. That, we're very, very right, and we're still not right enough for some people. And if you're going to try to play that game, you are just you can't win. So you either have to bring those people along to some kind of reasonable, educated middle ground, or you stick to your values and say, well, you have to stay on the fringe and we're going to get our support from a different way, and a way that we feel is legitimate and healthy and good for society. So I think the fracturing of these parties, I don't know that party that's going to have three people or however many more will be viable. I think these folks need to go back to the fringe where they came from. And this whole era of trying to legitimize things that are would never have been tolerated in politics before will hopefully come to a close as the Conservative Party see that it doesn't really help them in the long run.
At least we can hope it doesn't help them in the long run. But it is interesting to me that the BC Conservatives were previously a minor non-factor, and then just rapidly, based almost on their name, combined with the BC Liberals becoming the BC United, the BC Conservatives kind of just supplanted them, and then the former BC Liberals kind of merged themselves in. So there was this big unite the right impetus, kind of like there was at the federal level 2 decades ago, like there was recently in Alberta, which helped the United Conservative Party defeat the Alberta NDP. So it is just interesting to see that as much as they tried to unite all of the right wing into the BC Conservatives, it's starting to fracture out a bit. Do you think it could fracture more, that there are people who could also leave for this new party, or that they could leave to form a different caucus?
I mean, I really believe in looking at the root causes of what's causing something. So if we have people that, are holding views and they have more and more followers, views that normally would have been dismissed, or, you're entitled to hold them, but that doesn't mean you're fit for public office or that anyone has to entertain them. We can look at the influence of social media. We can look at the influence of misinformation. We can look at the rise of all of this grievances of the manosphere and whatnot, or anti-immigrant sentiment. And we can also look at foreign influence and education. And if we want to get back to a place where most people who are engaged in the political process, as they should be, come from an informed perspective, a compassionate perspective, then I think we need to look at those things and where people are getting their information from. Because inevitably, as soon as you get a large number of people who believe something, whether it's good or bad, then they are going to start having power in the political process and look attractive to people who want their support.
And ultimately, that is kind of the thing. You can become a legitimate and valid political party for a given definition of valid just by having enough people in the mass public support you, and social media gives you a way to build up a political movement almost from scratch. I don't know if you ever read the novel Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. He's a terrible human being, but one of the funniest parts of the novel to me is, well, it was written decades ago, and what used to be the least believable part of me is that his two siblings, while he's away doing the main plot of the novel, they kind of just blog online under pseudonyms, and through that they influence world politics by creating new ideologies. And when I read this 20 years ago, I thought it was like the dumbest thing I'd ever read. And now I read it and I'm like, oh, that's just what people like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro actually do.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in communications. We know the power of communications, and even the money behind it, who can put out the most ads, who can put out the most articles, influencers, voices. It all takes, it's basic marketing. You can market anything. But I would also say we have to look at what's making people vulnerable to those messages. Do we have media literacy like we used to? Do we have other sources of information that are credible and readily available to people? I think this paywalls is a terrible idea in an age of information. And I also just think we need to look at people's legitimate grievances and what they're upset about, that's making them look for easy answers, because there's always going to be people who are frustrated, who are angry, not happy with where they are. They might have very legitimate grievances, and how they react and respond and what they see as the solution is key. So I often laugh that it seems that the people who voted for Trump, yeah, they're upset about their standard of living. They're upset about, maybe the jobs are not there anymore in a heartland of America. But it's funny that they have been convinced that the people who will solve these issues for them are billionaires, instead of being convinced that it could be people who support unions or who support, mental health, so that's how you tackle the drug issue instead of building more jails.
Rich people essentially convince poor people that they're poor because of other poor people rather than the rich people who keep them all poor.
Exactly.
Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. Now, before we end our episode, we have a final question for you. For this week's No Prize, as a communications professional, do you believe that you should use your power of influence for good or for evil?
For good, obviously.
Well, that is why you win the No Prize. We like awarding a No Prize for it's a No Prize because there's no prize for pointing out the obvious. But that's why we like to test it, because sometimes people have the wrong answer.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. Well, that has been a very fun time. Sarbjit, thank you so much for joining the program and sharing your thoughts with everybody. We really appreciate it.
Amazing. Really great to speak with you as well.
And that will be our show for this week's program. Thank you so much to Sarbjit Kaur from KPW Communications to joining the program. And thank you to all of you for listening in to this week's news. And congratulations to Mark Carney, who have just gotten word will become the next Prime Minister of Canada after winning the Liberal leadership contest. We'll see you next week with even more new news. Not any old news. Then it's not news if it's old. Anyways, cheers.